Good afternoon. My name is Samarpreet Kaur and my student number is 2207285. Today I am here to present a video on the documentary The 13th. The 13th is an American documentary film, and this film explores the intersection of race justice in the United States. It is titled after the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which abolished slavery throughout the United States and ended involuntary servitude except as a punishment of conviction of a crime. Basically, in this documentary, it shows that the slavery has been perpetuated since the end of the American Civil War through criminalization behavior and enabling police to arrest poor freedmen and force them to work for the state under convict leasing suppression of African Americans. And in this movie, I would like to explain such topics such as which is related to the anthropology, for example the race and ethnicity, that what best explains the race and ethnicity in this documentary, and what best explains the inequality, the discrimination and prejudice, the stereotypings, the racism, the capitalisms, and what is the usage of media and the social organizations in this movie. It means what role does the social media and the organizations play in this documentary. Basically, this film begins within the uh, audio clip of the president of Barack Obama, which states that the U.S. had the 5% of the world's population, but the 25% of the world's prisoners in U.S. Um, it also explores the economic history of slavery and post Civil War resist legislation and the practices that replaced it, and the forced labor from the years after the abolition of the slavery to the present. In the southern states, criminalized minor offenses, arresting freedmen and forcing them to work when they could not pay fines, and this up and the, this approach has as like convict leasing. uh, she contends that the dis, uh, disenfranchised the most black people across the South, means at the turn of the 20th century, excluding them from the political systems, including juries. At the same time, that lynching of black people by white mobs reached a peak. Also, as a result, from the early 1970s to the present, the rate of the incarceration and the number of people in prisons has like increased dramatically in the United States. While at the same time, the rate of the crimes in the United States has continued to decline since the late 20th century. It is believed that as late as the 2016, the presidential elections, the eventual winner, the Donald Trump, worked to generate fear of crime and claiming higher rates in New York City. For instance, which was not true according to the documentary. And this documentary also states that the crime was lower overall than it had been in decades, but that the Republican candidates raised it to generate fear. Also, the private prisons contractors entered the market to satisfy demands as the arrests and sentences increased at that time, and which form an independent group within its own economic incentives to criminalize the minor activities in order to keep prisons full. Or moreover, politicians and the businessmen at that time in rural areas encouraged constructions of prisons to supply local jobs, and they also have had incentives to keep prisons full. And if I talk about that this documentary, The 13th, uh, it explores the history of racial inequality and the criminal justice system in the United States at that time. If As the 13th documentary explains that the historical construction of race and its impacts on the racial inequality in the United States. And the anthropology examines that how race is socially constructed, how racial categories are formed at that time, and how the African American people face race at that time based on their physical characteristics, especially on their skin color, because they were blacks. And uh, this the 13th documentary highlights the profound racial inequalities which persists in the criminal justice system. uh, Furthermore, particular the regarding mass incarceration, the anthropologist studies various forms of inequality at that time, including the race and racial and socioeconomic disparities. Because at that time the African American people face inequalities, to under and to understand their causes and the results and the ways in which they intersect with other social factors. And as it is believed that uh, yes in this documentary, uh, like there was some announcements in year 2016, by the Federal Bureau of Prisons, that its intention is to stop the contracting with private providers for prison services. And according to this film, the incarceration for adults has severely damaged generations of black and the minorities families and their children. This the film uh, the film explores the role of the American Legislative Exchange Councils, which is backed by the corporations that had provided the Republican states and federal legislators with like some draft legislations to support the prison industrial complex. It contends that only after some of the relationship were revealed did corporations and with corporations like any store and all, or uh, any other corporations and other receive criticism and drop out of the organizations. And I think it is mentioned in this documentary that in the 21st century the regularity of the fatal police shootings of unarmed minorities in like minor confrontations has been demonstrated by videos taken by the some bystanders and by the increasing use of cameras in police cars. Also, uh, uh, also uh, in the 13th, uh, mm, there are like African Americans who are biased, and there are some discrimination which was faced by the African American people within the criminal justice system, including the bias sentencing. And the anthropologist analyzed discrimination and prejudice to understand their mechanisms, the effects on the marginalized groups, and how they contribute to broader patterns of inequality. And the racism in this movie and the racialism shows that how racial ideologies and prejudice have influenced policies and practices throughout the American history. Because in this, the African American face racism and rationalism in the US in the late 20th century, or in the in the beginning of 20th century. And in this the anthropologist and in this documentary it also shows that the historical development of racial ideologies and the ways in which the racism is embedded within institution in that system. And what happened when there was a like use of social the media and social organizations in this documentary, which examines that how the media and social organizations have been shaped the public perceptions, their policies, how they narrate like surrounding crimes, the race and the criminal justice systems. and it also like explores the role of media and some social organizations in constructing some ideas and influencing people's opinion on issues which is related to race, ethnicity, social inequality, capitalism, and discrimination, prejudice, and stereotype. And in this movie, the African Americans face uh, some discrimination, in which the what happened that uh, the African Americans were like forcefully encouraged to uh, labor from the years after the abolition of the slavery to the present. So this is the documentary, the 13th documentary named as the 13th, which I read. Thank you.